Hello there. This is the dad's corner of the show. Do I look all right? Is my face too big in the camera? I've got this ridiculous getup on, but I'm here to read a question from the dad's corner, dad's question, a future dad, as it turns out in my case. So here's my question. Here we go. My wife is pregnant and we know that we're having a boy. Yay! And so our problem is she doesn't want to circumcise this baby. And I think that we should circumcise. The baby should match the dad. So that's my question. Please help me out. Thank you.
Why, thank you, guest dad. How eloquently put was that question about circumcision. And, well, I think I might be able to help you. Interesting debate. I think a lot of parents have been going down that road a bit by questioning whether or not to circumcise. So let's look at some of the data and the statistics about circumcision in the U.S. I think that it's interesting to note that circumcision is considered the most common surgery in the United States. Yeah, it's also, you know, the United States is one of the few developed countries where a majority of baby boys are still circumcised. That said, you know, in the 1960s, 90% of all baby boys born in hospitals were circumcised, but that rate has been dropping steadily. And the last statistic we have on it is from 2004, so it's not so long ago. But that dropped to 57%. So that's significantly lower than it used to be. And then it also varies state by state depending on the demographic of that state. So there are some states in the US where it's below 50% of babies are circumcised. So that's kind of interesting to consider. Now, I think that, you know, part of, I mean, obviously there's a lot that goes into the decision to circumcise, and quite frequently that has to do with cultural or religious reasons. Okay, we know that well, whatever, I mean, if it's part of your religious heritage, that's a different sort of an argument. And I know that in the Jewish community it's actually becoming slightly more popular not to circumcise, which is a very big deal considering that's like the cornerstone of Judaism. So, but you know, but there are, I know of parents who have actually made that decision, and it's, I mean, depending on like how sort of observant they are in terms of their religion, you know, it's either like sort of a no big deal, or that it's created, you know, a situation within the family, whereas the older generation is not in favor of that at all. But anyway, but barring religious reasons, okay, let's leave that out of the argument, because that's its own particular that has its own particular reasons and history and tradition, right? All right, so then in terms of everybody else, I thought this was interesting that, and perhaps you've heard this before, that doctors still occasionally recommend circumcision because of the evidence that it reduces the risk of penile cancer, urinary tract infections, HIV, and perhaps some other sexually transmitted diseases. And I remember reading about the link to cervical cancer for women seemed to be higher, you know, if their partners had been uncircumcised. So that was one thing. But, you know, again, the American Academy of Pediatrics does not endorse routine circumcision. So then you have, you know, that sort of, that very powerful group saying like that it's certainly not necessary. And then you have, you know, some other people who believe that there are some benefits to doing so. I think that it's, you know, it's really kind of been, you know, a debate that continues to be quite polarized. And I think ultimately it comes down to what you and your partner feel comfortable with. This is your child. You have a decision to make about obviously a long-term irreversible decision. And you know, I mean, I think that some people feel like the human body was not made in a way where it's like needs to be altered, or that there's extraneous anything on it. I mean, there's really, you know, I mean, you could say like, well, we don't use our little toe. Should we cut it off? You know, I mean, we don't really use our appendix. Should we all get it cut off? I mean, I realize that in this context, it's a little bit different because we're also dealing with, you know, some people feel like it's an aesthetic thing. And as the dad stated earlier, the notion of the child matching the father is a driving force for a lot of parents. And I don't want to, you know, say that it's only the man who feels that way. I mean, both the mother and the father could feel that that's important. Another thing that I hear a lot of people say, I think this is also quite interesting to think about. I've heard a lot of guys say, oh, well, I don't want my son to be different, not so much from me, but from the rest of his peers, so that when he's in the locker room, and it always comes down to the locker room, that he doesn't feel self-conscious. And when I hear people say that, I'm always like, well, okay, you know, I understand that, you know, sort of coming from your own perspective, perhaps, but, you know, but bear in mind that the trend is on the decline, so that truthfully, by the time that your baby born in, you know, the early 2000s goes to high school, probably half the kid, or whatever, you know, by the time they're in a situation where there's a locker room, probably half the kids around them it'll sort of be half and half in terms of like who is and who isn't. So it's really, I don't know that peer pressure is really like the way or to think about, you know, whether or not to do this. So in the end, I think you need to consider all factors. You know, you need to consider like what the parental feeling is about it. Now, a lot of moms have that feeling of like, I cannot hurt my son. And that's, you know, the circumcision is not generally done with I think they use a topical anesthetic when they do it in a hospital. And the baby still cries. I mean, it's certainly when they're having a bris, right? Which in the Jewish tradition, they usually give the baby like, you know, a little bit of wine or something, and they just kind of go ahead and do it. And that kind of goes back to this notion. I can't remember if I spoke about this in my last show. The notion that that babies don't feel things the way we do, like this idea of like when babies were born, you know, a generation ago, and they were, you know, slapped on the bottom and just kind of like, you know, treated, sort of manhandled in a way that was not sort of comforting and gentle. It all sort of in effort to get them to cry and like start, you know, exercising their lungs. You know, and then there's like a whole school of thought that was like, wait a minute, no, they do feel everything. And, you know, so if you kind of run with that train of thought, you know, it's even more alarming to think that you are going to, you know, do this minor surgery in a sort of a cavalier way. I wish I knew exactly if babies are anesthetized when they're having, you want me to find out? Should I just go find out right now and get back to you? Sure thing, hang on.